Hi, my name is Kale, and I like to make art. As a well-adjusted adult who knows what a puffle is, I love cute little critters. But what's the only thing that can make a cute cartoon sphere even better? That's right, body horror. So today, let's walk through my character design and illustration process for my adorable alien parasite and his unfortunate victim. In the beginning, there was nothing. Then there were thumbnails. 11 thumbnails specifically, all different explorations of what my beloved creature could end up being. I started off with a brief to fence in how far I was going to go with the project. I dreamt of a parasitic creature that attaches itself to the mind and body of its host, using the poor soul for locomotion to find more prey. The creature is securely contained and protected in an underground lab where researchers use test subjects to conduct strange, forbidden experiments. But the creature has now broken free and is attacking the scientists that held it captive. I wrote down a variety of fears and phobias that I thought my monster could embody. When I got down to it, the one I was most interested in exploring was this invasion of bodily autonomy idea. I realized I like monsters that are not just trying to get you, but are invasive in a way that feels personal. So beyond just being a creepy ghoul, I explored the myriad of ways the goober would puppet its host around. The highlights for me were this long squid worm snaking its way through its host's body, the blobs bursting forth from every orifice, and the little guy that split the body in a way that forced its host to walk around on all fours. But the one I found myself gravitating toward the most was this one, where balloon-like tendrils prop up and puppeteer the host around like a marionette. I thought it fit my preferred combination of weirdly personal and incredibly embarrassing ways to die, and it's the thumbnail I'm moving on with. There's two parts to this character, the guy and the parasite, so I take some time to dig deeper into both of those aspects. I designed a few test subject / prisoner suits for him to wear, playing with how many wires and science meters I wanted to strap onto him, or if I should keep him more plain. I did like this idea with all the wires at his waist, but I thought it would conflict with the tendrils on the parasite, so I gave him a more simplified science test subject suit. I also knew there was going to be a thing attached to the guy, but I wasn't quite sure yet what that thing was going to be. The ideas I played with were a series of mind-controlling squids, psychic slime with smiling faces, and a more jellyfish / oceanic growth with faces inside the bell. That last one I liked the most because it gave that contrast of a cute thing doing something brutally violent that I very much enjoy. I always have trouble coming up with names for my designs because I always feel what I come up with is cringe, but the only way out of cringe is through, so we should probably give these two names. So the jellyfish alien parasite thing will now be dubbed the JELLYMORPH, after of course Jelly and Xenomorph, and his poor victim will be Clive, after my favorite guy.
Clive Rossfield. I need to find out more and how to get him, now.
Next, we move on to drawing the character turnarounds to get a final pass on this character. I begin laying in a rough airbrushed outline of the JELLYMORPH blobs and Clive. I also add in the idea of giving him some handcuffs to better sell the prisoner / test subject idea. When I get to the rough sketch, I had trouble getting his legs to swing pathetically behind him in a way that sparked joy, so I restarted the whole sketch. Restarting will become a running theme in this process. But another new layer later, and I have him where I want him, looking constrained while also looking lifeless and limp. The stylistic goal of this project was to not use any line art and render everything in clean graphic shapes. I love line art, but I always felt reliant on it to make a successful drawing. It was a cover-up for my inexperience in painting fundamentals rather than a conscious decision. So I've been doing a lot of painting practice over the past year and really wanted to hone in on this graphic painting style. So I decided to commit to it for this project. I start to lay in my flat colors with an easy peasy orange and blue complementary color scheme. The suit of the poor soul in the JELLYMORPH's grip will be a bright orange with a gray trim, with bright blue bulbs above him stringing him up. The flats become the overall shape that I will paint light and shadow on top of, so if I get a good silhouette in there, I can just lay in my shadows and lights and build up the painting from there. I lay in an initial shadow value and a dark halftone to describe the turn of the form of Clive's suit and face. For the blob creatures, I render in a basic Fresnel-like effect and give it some highlights and darker tones to get a gelatinous feel. I make a valiant effort against using the pen tool, but learn it's kind of just the best way to get the shapes I want for my cute, murderous aliens. But as I continue to fill out the rest of the character, a sinking, spine-chilling realization slowly washes over me, that I actually hate where this is going. I think the idea is still solid, but my painting method is just wrong and turning out gnarly. So I restart. I go back to the flats and redo the painting, taking into account the aspects that I didn't like from the initial pass and throwing them out. I was overworking everything in the initial run. Instead of having nice simple shapes that read on their own, I was continuously carving into them, hoping I would blunder into something good. Restarting allowed me to get a cleaner initial pass that acted as a better base for the rest of the character. My initial attempt at the JELLYMORPH felt very desaturated, so I gave them a deeper blue color and made their underbulbs glow green for a bioluminescent alien feel. The creatures inside the bulbs got glowing orange eyes to connect them a little bit to the orange of Clive's suit, and the green underlight gave me the idea that the faces could be lit from underneath, giving a threatening flashlight under the face type of look. In the spirit of restarting, I probably went through about 20 iterations of the faces before I got them to where I wanted them to be. With most of the major elements in place, I start to add some details that give the character more punch, like blue slime dripping from the insertion points of the tentacles, and from where his eyes and mouth used to be. At this point, I had given up on going the entire way with just graphic shapes, as it was making the piece feel a little boring. I add in some airbrush gradients, like this iridescent effect on the bulbs, to the piece in order to add more visual interest. I do the same to the suit, adding yellows to the lights and reds to the shadows, and this leads into the part of my workflow where I start randomly adding things like highlights and additional colors, then immediately deleting them. The elements that survive this process are the trim on his suit and the prisoner number tag on his chest. I said it would be a while before I got the faces of the parasite correct, and here we are. Almost to the finish line, and I'm still futzing with them in order to get it right. I wrestled with questions wrangled by some of the greatest minds in art. Do I give my silly monster pupils? Do the human eyes cross into the uncanny valley? Ultimately, I decide on a black sclera with a single orange iris. Then I add a green underlight to communicate the roundness of the eye, and I think I finally get a correct balance of simplicity and detail. I showed my friend the final character to get some last-minute critiques. He recommended adding a dark gradient on the legs to better emphasize the focal point of the character, which was the torso and parasite, if you hadn't noticed. I then show him my initial draft of the character compared to the final, in order to wring praise from a respected peer and satiate my fragile ego. But with that, the front 3/4 view of my character is done. It was a bumpy road, but I think restarting it was worth it in the end. I think we landed on a much better final design because of it. We finish off this part of the process with a back-turn view of the character, and add in a few callouts for additional context, like the underside of the jelly bulbs and what the mouths of the tendrils look like. And with that, the final version of the JELLYMORPH is here. Now it's time to get prepped for the illustration. I hammer out a few composition sketches. I do 4 ideas of a scene where the parasites have gotten loose and are attacking the scientists. It was difficult to fit the JELLYMORPH in the scene because it was oddly tall, meaning I was always in battle to show the parasite and Clive in the same frame without having one of them clip off the page. I decided to go with this idea of the 2 scientists hiding underneath a table, with our brain-controlled Clive looming over them, menacingly. This scientist is holding a gun, so it's time to do some propped concept design. Over my holiday break, I drew some silhouettes of a laser pistol to give my brave man a little bit of defense. I played around with how sci-fi or realistic I was going to make the gun, and ultimately decided on this blockier approach to make it seem more like a real-life weapon. When I returned home and the Christmas cheer had worn off, I painted the rest of the prop in Photoshop, and now it's ready for action in the full illustration. Next, I had an idea that specimens of the JELLYMORPH could be kept in stasis pods and line the background of the illustration. So I do some research on stasis science tubes from a variety of fictional sources, and I decided to go with this one. But as I was drawing it, Photoshop crashed and deleted all my progress, so all that remains is the footage being shown to you now. But it's okay because I used the snipping tool to get my sketch back, and now I just start building in the flats and render out the stasis tubes, Here we have the final concept of the pod with its specimen trapped inside, smiling away. The last piece of prep is the Blender model that I'll use for lighting and composition reference. I place all the elements into the scene based on my thumbnail, furiously tabbing between my Blender scene and the YouTube video I have playing in the background, until finally my scene is set, the lights are in place, and I have my beautiful Blender model to begin actually drawing the illustration. The illustration begins with a light airbrushing of the elements we'll be working with to get a rough idea of the placement and gesture of everything in the scene, turning the screenshot of the Blender model off and on in another layer as needed. As we move on to the refined sketch, I start making more concrete decisions, like the face and pose of Clive and his mind roommate. The best references are the ones you make yourself, so Clive's pose is based on photos I took of myself, which will be thrown into the incinerator when this project is done. I get a handle on what these scientists in the foreground are going to look like. Like my thumbnail, we have two researchers cowering under the table, hoping to avoid the same fate as poor Clive. I loosely based the female one on my favorite Reyna costume in Tekken 8, and I based the male one loosely on this preset in Fallout New Vegas. I look back at this footage, and I feel there's something that was lost in the transition between the sketch and the actual painting. There's an energy here that I really like that I don't think is kept throughout the whole process. Just something I'll keep in mind for next time to make sure I'm translating the initial idea better and not letting the piece become stiff as I make progress. But moving on, we fill in the clutter on the table, adding in a computer and other random devices and stuff that you can be sure I did in-depth research on and did not just take a screen cap of a Nile Red video and copy the random instruments he has lying around. With the sketch finished, I progressed into creating flats similar to what I was doing for the character sheet. I create an outline like I'm doing a line art pass, but then fill in the shape so we have a nice silhouette to paint inside of. Rendering begins with adding a simple shadow shape over Clive, done on a multiply layer, with an additional multiply layer to lay in some darker shadows. After the shadows are mapped, I block in the 3 JELLYMORPHs poking out of his head and add a rim light to the backside, and a blue fill light that the figure is receiving from the stasis pods off to his side. After adding some glow effects to the underside of the bulbs, I move into painting some faces and slightly off-putting underside lighting to the creature. Speaking of faces, I give the same treatment to Foreground Scientist 1 as I did Clive, bringing him into being by laying in some shadow and light shapes. I struggled with his eyebrows and whether I wanted him to be frightened or angry, like he's pissed off and determined to shoot this silly monster. I'll ultimately go with angry to contrast with the scared expression that I'm going to give Foreground Scientist 2. I take a break from the foreground characters to start painting in the random clutter in the midground, painting the oscilloscope, computer, microscope, and other various nondescript science devices. I also add in a loose JELLYMORPH to menacingly peer over the junk and threaten the terrible fate our researchers may face. I loop back around and give Foreground Scientist 2 a face and glasses. I've always liked circular glasses, so it helps that those are also the easiest types of glasses to keep in correct perspective. After bringing her to life and making her no fear, I continue to render out the background with the vents and tubes that adorn the back wall. As you may have guessed, the blue, green, and red pipes are of course a literary allusion to the classic pipe puzzle from Dino Crisis. At this stage, most of the major elements of the piece are blocked in. One of the only things left is giving Foreground Scientist 1 his laser weapon. I paint in the details of the gun, like the knobs and meters, and debate giving a red glow around the exhaust area of the gun, but I decide it draws too much attention, so I end up making it almost imperceptible. Foreground scientists are supposed to be the second thing you look at in this illustration, so having a giant red glowing gun would compete for the viewer's attention that I once spent on the slimy jelly monster. The third thing I want the viewers to see are these tiny JELLYMORPH specimens kept in tanks in the background. Underneath the rendering of the glass, I add in a few additional fellows looking at the drama unfolding in front of them. I'm a lot looser with painting them because, once again, I don't want them to attract as much attention as the other characters in the scene. With those smaller guys added, we're in the final stretch. We start to paint over the whole thing and fix some tiny details, like removing some background pixels that poke through the painting, fixing a hairline or two, and playing with the fog and atmospheric effects. And with one final vignette effect, this painting is ready to be pulled out of the oven and served. Overall, I'm happy with it, and it feels good to finally make my first real project that was completely without line art. But now that I'm at the end of it, I'm questioning whether it was worth doing in the first place. It took a lot of retooling and restarting, but somehow this plane got off the ground and I have a character design, some props, and an illustration to show for it. I hope you enjoyed watching me make some art today, and I'll see you next time.